For this lesson, I'm kind of starting at the end. This is the drawing that I'm going to end up with this lesson. And I'm showing you this because I want you to really understand what we're trying to do. We're going to be trying to draw the negative spaces. When I'm drawing, I use the negative space as much as I use the positive space to create the drawing, to find the objects. You'll be drawing positive space as well. So for instance, this tree trunk. But in this lesson, I want you to try and focus on the spaces in between, not so much the positive spaces, the objects that we're seeing and drawing. We're going to begin with the house shape and go from there. Negative space, when you're really creating a drawing, it's the quiet areas the eye can rest in. It shouldn't overpower the positive spaces like this does. This is an exercise to really start to see this and to really start thinking about these negative spaces. The still life I've set up for this is kind of fun. It has a little house on a stick and a big branch I found on the beach and a long stick that was in the yard. You could set something up like this with several sticks that are kind of intertwined. You could draw a leafy plant. What you're trying to do is to find or set up objects that you can both see positive and negative space in. Try not to do something that's too busy, because you'll drive yourself crazy trying to see all the negative space. And try to find something that has big bits of negative space and little bits of negative space. So you can practice seeing these smaller distances and the great big shapes as well. For this lesson, you don't need very many supplies. You're going to need your sketch paper. This is 18 by 24 inch sketch paper. You'll need one charcoal pencil. I'm going to use a 2B. You could use an HB, and you may use a kneaded eraser. And that's all you need for this lesson. For this exercise, I'm not going to create an envelope. I'm going to just go in and start drawing, looking at the negative space. I'm going to begin, because it's an easy object to see, at the house shape. And I'm going to begin where I think on my paper it sort of is, with the side of the black house. Thinking about how long it is. So we are using some positive space and we are looking at the objects, but mostly what we're going to look at is all the negative space. I have to begin somewhere. I'm thinking about how long that pole is from the house to branch. And now I'm going to draw the branch as it goes across my paper. And I'm going to draw it until the point where I think it hits the stick on the left, or where it visually hits the stick on the left. Now I'm following the stick on the left upwards. Don't worry about perfection in this lesson. Try and focus on seeing the negative spaces, not on drawing them perfectly. I'm going to leave this for a moment and go back to here, because I want to consider this negative space and how it interacts with this, with the house. So I'm going to draw the peak of the house. And now I'm looking at this distance here, this space. I'm going to leave that and go back here to look at all of the negative space between the house and the tree trunk. I'm looking at this negative space. And even though I'm drawing the tree trunk essentially, I'm looking at the negative space that surrounds it. So I'm looking at the negative space here, and then I'll begin looking at the negative space here. I'm also comparing my positive shapes. So I'm visually comparing where the top of the branch lines up with the roof of the house and trying to draw my lines So these spots line up in my drawing the same way they line up in my still life. This is not a fast exercise. It's considered, it's slow. I'm constantly looking at the shapes and what I'm seeing and trying to interpret what I'm seeing. What is the distance here between this little branch and this curly stick? I'm going to look at the space now between the big branch and the pole below the house. I know the pole goes straight, and I can kind of think about how wide it is. I'm going to look at the space now here on the right side of the tree trunk. To find where to begin, I visually measure how wide the branch looks in my still life by comparing the bottom of the branch to the side of the house. Now I'm paying attention to where the tree trunk corresponds to the branch, comparing the negative spaces on the right and the left of the tree trunk. Take your time with this. Really pay attention to what you're doing and seeing. I'm looking at the width of the branch here and that little triangle of negative space between the pole and the tree trunk. Now I'm comparing this negative space I created and this, and I can see that this is a little too high, so I'm going to get rid of it. Now I'm going to draw the negative space below the large branch. I'll start with the positive space of the pole and the branch and then draw the negative space. I'm looking at the negative space between the two branches. So there's a curly branch here and there's a branch here, and I'm looking at the space, that kind of rectangle with a bump right here. Now I'm going to draw the space between the pole and the tree trunk. This negative space will be easier to find if I start with the pole, so we'll draw that first. So I'm using positive space first to define this area of my drawing. I'm considering the width of this curly branch to begin the negative space here. Now I'm going to work on the negative space is essentially outside my still life. To do that, I'm going to use the positive space, the tree branch, to find the other side of that tree branch. So I'm actually literally going to draw that end of that tree branch in. And then I'll draw the black stick, essentially defining the positive space. Now I'm looking at that sort of space here and the positive space of the bird-shaped tree branch. Now I'm going to look at that tiny wedge of negative space in between this dark stick and the big branch, which is right here. I've drawn the negative space here much smaller than it should be, so try drawing it as it is in the still life. This tiny bit of negative space here that defines the house shape. And I'm going to work on this area by drawing the positive space, but I'm also still thinking about and looking at the negative spaces as well. So that's our drawing. Don't worry about being too perfect with this. Do try to find those negative spaces and to create the shapes you're seeing. But what I want you to try and focus on is really think about what you're seeing, to draw the negative space, not the positive space so much, to try and keep reminding yourself, I'm drawing negative space. It's a fun and challenging exercise.